Going. Hey guys, I am here today to do a quick review about our Civil War unit we've been learning about. Now, if you remember our Civil War unit, we remember that in the North there was a lot of production, a lot of industry. It was a different way of life up north. And in the South, there were different...
Guys,
Hey!
why did the penguin not jump off of the iceberg? It's because it got cold feet.
Hey! Get out! Get out! Can't even teach you guys without that silly Miss Hill coming in. Okay, what was I saying? Yes, okay, so the North had a lot of industry, a lot of factory, manufacturing type of jobs. In addition to that, they didn't have slaves. If you remember from some of our read-alouds with Mrs. Hill, in the South they had plantations, they had large farms. Some of those plantations had cotton, some of those plantations had cane sugar, and some even had tobacco. In the South, the way of life was quite different. They used slaves, and the slaves didn't get paid for their work. They didn't get to be rewarded. They were just the property of the plantation owners. And we talked about one of those slaves recently. We talked about Harriet Tubman.
What's black and white and red all over?
Get out! Get out!
Guess what it is, Miss
No!
Warren?
It's a newspaper! Now get out!
It's a sunburned zebra.
Oh, I was totally wrong. Okay. All right, slaves. Back to slaves. All right, Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a slave in the South. They called her Minty. Do you guys remember this read aloud? She had many different jobs, and she didn't like it so much. She had to work hard. Long hours, jobs that the white people didn't want to do. And one of the turning points in her life was when one of her siblings, Moses, he was going to be sent away to another plantation. And Harriet Tubman's mom said, "No, you will not send away my son." And at that moment, Harriet Tubman started to think, maybe there's more to this life than just being a slave. Maybe one day I can be free too. We know later that Harriet Tubman was instrumental in forming the Underground Railroad, and one of the things that they talked about was a map to how to find their way north. And they used the drinking gourd, they used the stars, and they had a song that they talked about how to find their way north. And if you remember, the Underground Railroad wasn't really a railroad. It was a path that the slaves would take to freedom. And Harriet Tubman, she was one of the most important people in that. She also became a spy for the Civil War, but we'll talk about that later. We also talked in this unit a little bit about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a really tall gentleman. He was from... Seriously, I'm teaching!
Mrs. Warren.
No, no!
But I have a really important question.
Okay, this is the last time. This is it.
Why did the little boy
Seriously?
scream when he opened the refrigerator?
Why did the little boy scream when he opened the refrigerator? Because Abe Lincoln was inside the refrigerator.
No, because he saw the salad dressing.
All right, salad dressing. That Miss Hill, we should keep her around. All right, Abe Lincoln was not inside the refrigerator. Abe Lincoln became the President of the United States. He was a senator, he was a lawyer, he was a very important man, and in 1860, he became the President of the United States. Shortly after Abraham Lincoln became the President of the United States, the South decided that they didn't want to be part of the Union anymore. If you look at my picture right here, you'll see the gray states. The gray states were the ones that seceded or left the Union. They wanted to create their own independent country. So if we look up north, we'll see the blue ones. Those were called the Yankees, and they were part of the Union. If we look down here, we'll see that those are called the Rebels or the Confederacy. We're going to talk a few more minutes about that. The Confederacy. Now remember, the Confederacy, it had different states like Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee all made up the Confederacy. They were these southern states. So this was their flag. And if you remember, the primary economic income down there was due to their crops. Remember, we had cotton, we had sugarcane, we had tobacco, we had many slaves that lived down there. I keep thinking she's coming back. I hope not. They lived down south and they were part of the Confederacy. They seceded or left the Union. The Union remained. Remember, our friend Abraham Lincoln was part of that. He was the president of the United States during the time that ever feel like it? What are you doing?
I have another really important question for you.
Does it have anything to do with the Civil War?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Does it have anything to do with the South seceding?
What does secede mean?
Oh, secede means, my raccoon face, that they left the Union and they started their own country, and they called it the Confederate States of the Union, the Confederacy of the United States. Does it have anything to do with any of that?
Thanks for answering that question, Mrs. Warren. I have one more for you.
Okay, better be good. Keep going. Keep going.
Why did Tigger look
Seriously?
in the bathroom?
Why did Tigger look in the bathroom? We're talking about the cartoon that bounces up and down, dude, on his tail?
T-I-double-G-R.
Why did Tigger look in the bathroom? I have no idea, Miss Hill. I hope this is your last joke.
It's because he was looking for poo.
That Miss Hill. I love her. Where was I? I was not looking for poo. All right, so the North is called the Union, okay? This was their flag. They stayed together under the direction of President Lincoln. They stayed together while the South seceded or left the Union and started their own country, okay? So during that time, Civil War broke out. Mrs. Hill did an excellent job telling us all about that. And we know that Robert E. Lee was the Confederate leader of the military. They called him an old man. They called him an old man out of respect. He really wasn't that old. Probably wasn't much older than some of your parents. He was about 50 years old, and they called him an old man out of respect. His soldiers would follow him anywhere. He was a trained U.S. military who had seen so many different military actions, and he was married to the great-granddaughter of George Washington. At first, when the war broke out, he didn't want to be a part of it. He was from Virginia. Do you remember where Virginia was? Virginia was right on the line of the Union, and he lived in Virginia, and he didn't want to be a part of it. He said, no, I don't want to be a part of this. But when his home state decided to leave the Union and join the Confederacy, he decided it was better to lead his troops and to lead his people that he lived with. So he was the general of
Mrs. Warren.
Confederacy. He probably had a horse.
They're like twins.
He probably had a horse. Do you think they're related? Not Robert E. Lee, but the horse. The horse. Do you think they're related? I think so too. He probably had a horse just like that he rode. So he led the Confederate troops in battle, and during that time there was a lot of people who died. A lot of people died during the Civil War. When the Civil War was over, there was over 600,000 of them that died. There was over 1 million injuries. People who had been injured by the war permanently. So during that time, taking care of those hurt and those wounded became really important. There's a gal, and we talked a little bit about her. Her name was Clara Barton. And Clara wasn't formally trained as a nurse, but she would follow the battles. She would go around from the battlefields, from different battlefields, to help and to care for those who were wounded, ill, or afflicted by this war. She was originally a school teacher from Massachusetts, but she saw a need and she was really compassionate and she wanted to help. Her organization later became the American Red Cross, and we still see this emblem around every now and then. We do. The war continued on. The war lasted for 4 years, and President Lincoln was still the president, and it lasted a really long time. That's a really long time.
Wait, Mrs. Warren, did it last as long as this quarantine?
This quarantine feels like it's been like 40 years, doesn't it, Miss Hill? But it wasn't even as long as this quarantine.
It wasn't?
No, 4 years. Think of like your little nephews and nieces who are only 4 years old and they're not in school yet. It's as long as they've been alive, Miss Hill.
Oh my goodness.
That's a long time for the war to last.
I do have a question about quarantine for you, Mrs. Warren.
Yes, Miss Hill. What's your question about quarantine?
What kind
Related to the Civil War.
Sure, yeah. What kind of jokes do you tell in quarantine?
What kind of jokes do you tell in quarantine? I do not know, Miss Hill. I haven't heard a lot of jokes here lately because I've been stuck at home.
You tell inside jokes.
That, Miss Hill. She sure is funny. Where was I? Yes! Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. He was the 16th president of the United States. Remember, he became president in 1860, right about when all the Civil War was happening. And he was very frustrated because he didn't want his people to fight. He didn't want to give up. He wanted them all to come back into one country, the United States of America. He wanted to end the war. So in January 1863, in Hampton, Virginia, he had issued what was called the Emancipation Proclamation. And in that Emancipation Proclamation, I know, say that with me.
Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, say it again.
Emancipation
Proclamation. It almost has a rhythm to it. Emancipation means you're going to set something free. So Abraham Lincoln, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation as the President of the United States. Now when he wrote it, he didn't say, okay, poof, all the slaves are free right now at this moment. What he actually said was all of the slaves in the southern states have earned their freedom or deserve their freedom, and they should be let go. In the beginning of the war, it wasn't about slavery. It really wasn't about slavery. It was about the states wanting to do their own thing. But it became about slavery as soon as President Lincoln issued this Emancipation Proclamation. His intent in doing so was to end the war and to have his people become together again. Now, one person I wanted to mention to you was this guy. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. I don't know if you know anybody named Ulysses. I sure don't. But this is Ulysses S. Grant. He was a military man also, just like Robert L. Lee, and he was very determined. He was a very determined and stalwart leader. He led the Union Army, and he was called unconditional surrender, meaning he wouldn't give up at all. Well, he and...
Do you want to know something else about Ulysses S. Grant, Mrs.
Oh, what about Ulysses S. Grant?
You guys can see in this picture, he has really good hair. You notice that? Guess what, Mrs. Warren?
You have really good hair.
I do, you're right. But I also have an uncle who has never once brushed his hair. Isn't that crazy?
That's disgusting.
Do you want to know why he hasn't ever brushed his hair?
Ew. Why hasn't he brushed his hair?
Because he's bald.
Okay. Almost done, and then we'll get to your assessment, my friends. We had Ulysses S. Grant on the Confederate side, on the Union side, and we had Robert E. Lee on the Confederate side. And finally, there was so much bloodshed and war and just destruction of various cities. The South had a lot of towns totally destroyed. I told you how many people lost their lives. Over 600,000 people lost their lives during the Civil War, that they came together and signed a treaty. And remember I told you, Ulysses S. Grant, he was unconditional surrender. Oh, he's upside down. He was sideways. Unconditional surrender. He didn't surrender. It was actually Robert E. Lee, who was the general of the Confederate Army, who surrendered to him at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And it was 4 years after the war started. Like I said, the war lasted 4 years long. It took almost 2 months for everyone to find out that the war was over. There are some people still fighting and elsewhere because they didn't know the war was over. They didn't have TVs, they didn't have radio, they didn't have cell phones or anything like that. And so it took almost 2 months for everyone to figure out that the war had ended. Once the war was ended, we know that President Lincoln was still the President of the United States, and there was a lot of attempts at regrouping and growing back together and becoming the part of the country altogether. Okay, friends, that was your quick review on the Civil War.
All right, my friends, now that Mrs. Warren is done with her fabulous review, go ahead and open up the PDF that is attached to this assignment. We are going to do one more activity before we set you free today. When you get that PDF open, you will see 2 pages of pictures that look like this. These are pictures of people or events that we learned about while we talked about the Civil War. We used these pictures in previous lessons to create a timeline of events in the Civil War. We put these pictures in the order that they happened. Our job today is to recreate that timeline. There are 2 different ways that you can do that today. If you would like to, you can print out these pages and cut out each picture along those dotted lines. You can then glue those pictures onto a new piece of paper in the correct order that they happened. If you choose that route, you will need to take a picture of your completed timeline and upload it to the Google Classroom assignment. Otherwise, you can do this one completely online. You will just need, instead of cutting them out and moving them, we will label them in the correct order that they happened using our text box or our drawing tool. We will label them with a number 1 next to whichever thing happened first, a number 2 next to the one that happened second, and so on. If you choose that route, friends, because our pictures are all in black and white, you will probably want to use a very bright color so that we can really see your numbers that you're writing. You can write those numbers on the picture or next to the picture. Before I set you to do that, let's talk about these pictures and what's happening in them. Our first one is a photograph of Clara Barton. Clara Barton earned the nickname the Angel of the Battlefield because she helped wounded soldiers during the course of the Civil War. She was even allowed into the heart of battles that were still going on so that she could help soldiers when they needed it the most. Later in her life, Clara Barton formed the organization, the Red Cross, to continue helping people even after the war was over. In our next picture, we have a photograph of Harriet Tubman. Remember, Harriet Tubman was called Minty as a child, and she was born into slavery. But as an adult, she used the Underground Railroad to escape and find freedom in Pennsylvania in the north. She then decided to become a conductor on the Underground Railroad so that she could help other people find freedom as well. In our next picture, we have a symbol. This is the symbol for the organization, the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross was started by Clara Barton a long time ago, but it still is in operation today, and it's still helping people. Our next picture is a photograph of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was president during the Civil War, and we talked about a lot of things that he did and choices he made during the Civil War. This picture, though, we want to focus on when he was elected as president. He was elected to be president in the year 1860, before the war began. On our next page, we have 2 pictures that look very similar. Do not let those ones confuse you. We'll talk about what's going on in each of those pictures. In our first painting, we have General Lee surrendering to General Grant at the courthouse in Appomattox, Virginia. In this picture, we have a map of the United States. We can see there are some states that are colored in darker. These states were the first states that seceded from the Union or left the United States to form the Confederate States of America. And in this last one, this shows President Lincoln reading the Emancipation Proclamation to his advisors. The Emancipation Proclamation stated that all slaves in Confederate lands would be free. But it took a long time for that to be true. It didn't happen right away, and it took a long time for that to actually be true. But it did change the focus of the war, and now people knew that we were fighting the war to end slavery once and for all. All right, my friends, your job is to put those different events in the correct order that they happened. Label them all 1 through 7, and make sure they are in the right order. When you are done, go ahead and take that picture and attach it to the assignment, or if you did it online, go ahead and turn it in up here. And you are all finished today. We will see you tomorrow in our next lesson for our test.